I'm David Killion, the U.S. Ambassador to UNESCO, and I'm so happy today to be with Phyllis Magrab, my dear friend and close collaborator, our U.S. National Commissioner for UNESCO. For me, my work together in partnership with Phyllis Magrab represents the best of the U.S. engagement at UNESCO. When the United States is most effective at UNESCO is when the government and civil society are working together. Phyllis is an education expert. She is a professor of pediatric psychology at Georgetown University, and she's been engaged in this international development work for many decades. She heads the U.S. Afghan Women's Council as its executive director and its vice chairperson, and she's been engaged in UNESCO work for an awfully long time too, all the way back to 2000, when Phyllis was a delegate at the big conference in Dakar, Senegal that set the Education for All goals. Phyllis, it's so good to be with you today, and I want to start by talking about education. The education sector at UNESCO is a critical sector at UNESCO where the United States has real serious equities, and we've been engaged strongly in both the Bush administration, the Obama administration, trying to strengthen literacy, also trying to build a partnership for girls and women's education. Can you talk a little bit about the U.S. engagement in education at UNESCO?
Well, first of all, thank you, David, for those kind remarks. It is a great partnership. You've been an incredible ambassador, and it's been a privilege to really work with you.
Thank you.
You know, in 2000, when the Education for All agenda was set, the U.S. was a very important partner in that, even though we were not members at the time. We were very active in the planning of that event and became very active in the Secretariat as it moved forward. That initiative has been kind of a hallmark of UNESCO, so our engagement with it is very important. I think that the focus it's taken on primary education has given room for the U.S. really to shine in examining the other bookend issues like literacy and early childhood.
Right.
And I think that's been very important for us to be engaged.
Yeah, and when I first came to UNESCO, Mrs. Bush had a huge impact here, and the United States had put together some real infrastructure on literacy, which was important because without the United States, I don't think UNESCO would have been focused on literacy. We tried to continue to make that work in the Obama administration, and we brought to the table a big partnership on girls and women's education when Hillary Clinton came here. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you did with the Bush administration on literacy and where things stand today? I know you've done a lot of work in Afghanistan.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's very interesting that you mentioned both this administration and the former administration, because there has been a lot of continuity in the efforts at UNESCO. Mrs. Bush really inaugurated the focus on literacy. She was the UN ambassador for the literacy decade.
Right.
And in that role and her work with UNESCO, she initiated regional conferences throughout the world that were hosted by other First Ladies. And this really boosted the agenda and gave it visibility in a really important way.
Right.
And then she was very active, and our mission was very active, in establishing an extra budgetary fund. And I think that's partly what you've been alluding to, these funds that were brought to the table to really enhance the literacy initiative. And you know, there have been some complications in moving that fund forward, but you've done, and your team has done an amazing job of putting a really excellent initiative on the table in the South Sudan. And I just had a chance, I was with Mrs. Bush a week or two ago, and I was telling her about it, and she's just thrilled that this
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
And you know, actually Mrs. Clinton was at the same event, and the focus on gender, which the South Sudan issue has, is a common interest of both of theirs. They were with me for something called the U.S. Afghan Women's Council initiative that you were talking about. They're the common co-chairs of this, which is very bipartisan.
Right.
And through that council and through UNESCO's work, we've been able to really initiate some very interesting projects.
Yes, and I think as Mrs. Bush played an important role at UNESCO that we're grateful for, and that still survives today, her legacy, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton really engaged here too, and built a global partnership on girls and women's education that has great corporate partners, Microsoft, that has foundation partners, the Packard Foundation, Aga Khan Foundation, many others. Can you talk a little bit about public-private partnerships and how Secretary Clinton really helped to accelerate the process of the U.S. practicing real 21st century diplomacy here at UNESCO with strong public-private partnerships?
Well, I was here for that event, and it was really a remarkable expression of U.S. capacity, values, interests, all focused around gender and around improving gender equality, particularly in education. What was brought to the table were very visible public-private partnerships with very visible corporations.
Yeah.
And I think this is a little bit of an impetus for other countries. I mean, we know China, for example, is moving in that direction. I think we have sort of set a framework for UNESCO that will be important not only for the organization, but for the countries themselves, individually.
Right. And I was remiss not to mention Procter & Gamble, of course.
Oh, yes, of course. Oh,
they're the key, really, the key private partner in this great global coalition that we've been able to put together. Well, today in UNESCO, the United States is facing a particular challenge. Due to the entry of the Palestinians, the United States for 2 years has been unable to provide new funding to UNESCO, either our dues or voluntary funding. And as you mentioned, UNESCO has become a sort of a struggle for global influence. It is the standard-setting organization in global education. And many emerging powers, certainly China, has been so very active here, bringing their own public-private partnerships to the table, taking leadership in the education sector. We have other emerging powers, Gulf states, who've been putting a lot of money into education, especially Sheikh Moza in Qatar, and Brazil is very active at UNESCO. What's important for the future for the United States at UNESCO as we try to move through this crisis and get back to a more normalized relationship with the organization?
The United States is a world power, and we should behave like a world power in UNESCO and not accede to countries like China and the Middle East. We should stand tall and we should play our part, because we bring incredible experience, incredible programs. I think, for example, we initiated a mobile literacy program in Afghanistan with UNESCO, which is, now that we're drawing down our troops, we are needing to be active in countries like Afghanistan to promote peace in different ways. So by educating girls and educating women, that's something that's a UNESCO imprimatur. And the program that we're doing in Afghanistan, for example, is built on a program that came out of UNESCO in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. And it uses mobile phones. Oddly, 80% of women in Afghanistan have mobile phones, as an adjunct to a literacy training program. And what we found in a pilot program is that it cuts in half the amount of time to bring women to a reasonable literacy level.
Wow.
Well, that may be, in a way, it blends the education issues with the peace issues, with our values of gender issues. And, that's what can happen at UNESCO, because it focuses on all of those areas. And so we need to stay engaged.
Yes.
And, I know that now, while we are not contributing funds, we still have ways to influence, particularly because of our strong role in public-private partnerships, our strong technical expertise that we bring to the table.
Yeah, and I think a crisis is always an opportunity.
Absolutely.
And we've tried to take advantage of the crisis to be really proactive in defining the importance of UNESCO to the United States, to our national interests. to explain that to folks both inside the Beltway and outside the Beltway in the United States, and also to focus on the things that we do that aren't about funding. You know, the public-private partnerships that we bring to the table, the leadership that we bring from experts like you, and you know, that brings me to the National Commission. The National Commission is an incredible institution, and even though it's as old as our engagement with UNESCO from the 1940s, it's a modern model of engagement and foreign policy, where the U.S. government actively partners with experts in all of the vast subject matter that UNESCO is engaged in, that has mandates in. And your engagement with us here, with our delegation, you come to almost every governing body meeting that we have. You advise us, you help us, you are right there with us when we're working on resolutions with other countries, fighting out language on resolutions, and it's such a help to me as an ambassador to have an expert like you at those moments. And we have a couple of others that are similarly active. Nigel Cameron, for example, in the social sciences is incredible, and he comes so very often to help us here at UNESCO, and he really adds a lot of strength to our delegations. Can you talk a little bit about the Commission? Obviously we're having some great success, but are there ways that things that we're missing in terms of the engagement of the U.S. National Commission at UNESCO that we could work on?
Well, you know, we have a very large commission, and by having a 100-member commission, you obviously have a range of people in terms of their engagement with UNESCO, engagement around particular issues, and so, you know, I wouldn't, you would be overrun if all 100 of us showed up all the time. I do think, though, there is much greater potential within the Commission, and I think that takes some leadership within the Commission and some mentorship. For example, newer members of the Commission could maybe benefit from, say, Nigel's and my experience. We could maybe be a little bit more of a role model of how you can engage. And it also, I mean, some of us have more economic capacity to engage. We can't expect the government to fund us to do these things.
Right.
So we need to find other sources and ways to do that. I mean, when I come, I'm always on my own dime, and I think that's part of the contribution of being a commissioner, that when you join the commission, it isn't just a title to get you into a restaurant. It's meant to be something active and engaged, and you need to bring your own resources to it. Not necessarily financial, but your own intellectual resource, your own networking resource. All of those things can make a powerful, powerful difference. Even in this time of where we're trying to get UNESCO better understood in the United States. The commissioners, without leaving home, can make an extraordinary contribution in creating educational opportunities within the country. It really has a lot to do with will. And so if you have the will and the commitment, and I mean, I have a very deep regard for this organization with all its warts. And I think it plays a place in our world stage that no other organization takes. And so to that end, I want to commit a lot of my time and energy to this. And I would like to infuse that in more commissioners, to have them take that kind of level of engagement.
Well, thank you very, very much, Phyllis. I have really benefited from our partnership here in Paris at UNESCO, and I think hopefully we've demonstrated what can happen between the United States government and civil society, and more specifically between a U.S. delegation to UNESCO and the U.S. National Commission for UNESCO.
Definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for having me.